Hello, I'm Chris Kenya. Welcome to the Challenges in Learning English and Other International Languages. This podcast connects language and culture to life, learning, and home. My guests shed light on the impact of language and culture on individuals and society as they share their stories and experiences. You'll be informed and inspired as we explore how language and culture make us human and bring hope in the midst of a challenging world. Well, it's a great pleasure today to welcome to the podcast my friend Aulia Damayanti. Hi, Aulia.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well and I'm very excited to talk with you because you always have such strong insight into language learning, language proficiency, why language even exists. And there's some things that really struck me about it, Auli. And I'd like to start with you and some of this aspect and why you express this aspect in your background into the language world. Okay?
Sure.
All right. First of all, that I recognize that there's a lot of things that you do that have to do with opening opportunities to people, giving access. Why the access only? Why so much emphasis on enabling accessing?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure quite how to answer that, but I think life is all about creating opportunities for yourself and for others. It's why we live. It's to make this world a better place. And if people don't have opportunities to grow to become more than they think they can, then you're not fulfilling the blessing that we have to be alive as a human being at this time and in this place. There's always been a sense that it is important to do those kind of things to create opportunity. That was the way I was raised as a kid. I was always brought around to different faith groups and thought that people all basically believe the same things. They expressed them in different ways. They had certainly different beliefs, but we all believe many of the same truths that we are here on earth. It is a blessing, and we have to make the best of what we're doing to make life better for others, to preserve the world that we have. So I don't know just going on here, but I think that's what it's all about is it's creating opportunities.
You went and created so many of these opportunities in the direction of language and language excellence. Why going in that direction, Oli?
Chris, that's kind of weird. Growing up, I grew up in Celebes and I was very provincial in the sense that I had never been out of South Celebes and until I was 18. I don't think I ever had been to Sengkang, which is only like 50 miles away.
Very exotic. Sengkang, right?
Very exotic, yeah. And I remember taking English and Japanese in high school, and I was not terribly good language student. I just couldn't connect with that, and I didn't understand what it was for. But I was lucky. I was in a good high school, and they did prepare us well for English. But way back then, I won't say how long ago, we were taking proficiency oriented English. And so now if I'm in England or America or Australia, I can still get around even after many, many years. But I first, mm, it's a weird thing, but my first exposure to anything international when I was in Bali. Bali was a big part of my life, and there was a bunch of people there from Bali, I mean from Italy, and I was just struck by their presence, and they were powerful but calm and quiet and gentle, and from that moment on I always had sort of a fascination with Italy.
Interesting.
And that started to open my eyes to Italy, and I decided if I'm going to do something related to Italy, I'd better get over there and really learn the language. So that was my introduction to language. Once I was in Italy, I was hooked and I could never disconnect from it, and that began to open my eyes to the much bigger world out there.
Well, and you say you used the phrase that you didn't know what language was for in high school. How did your experience in Italy change that?
Yeah, I think virtually all of us who are monolingual growing up, all of us who are monolingual growing up and had the experience of learning a second language are just amazed when the first experience happened that you can actually communicate with somebody in another language. And I remember sitting on a train going to Milan from where I was staying out in the suburbs, and I actually had a conversation where I understood a few words of the guy sitting next to me, and he understood a few words that I said, and it was breathtaking. And all of the sudden, there was an entire world open to me. When I was in Italy, you have to speak the language to it, right? You just can't avoid the language, and then it came alive, and I just I just was just endlessly fascinated by everything Italian.
How long did you spend in Italy, Auli?
Oh, altogether it was a little over 3 years.
And what did you do there? How did you use the language then, once you were embedded?
Well, the first time I was over there, I was a language student. So I went to immersion school for a year. Then I worked as a cook and later worked for Apple, which was kind of interesting. And I went on a long trip all over Europe in my van, where I learned a lot of different European languages. Um, I found the whole experience of traveling and learning new things to be awesome, and that was really fascinating.
You came to a conclusion there, did you not, about how folks got fooled by not understanding language and culture? Explain what you experienced and what the impact was. Then, in your understanding of what happens when people do not understand language and culture as they might.
Well, there's often a gap between management of international company and their workforce. So in Italy, there are a large number of international from the West, primarily who's would send over managers from Europe or the US or wherever, and they generally were expert in the company culture of a company, but they didn't speak Italian or have much background in Italian culture. And generally, or we would frequently see, not generally, but we would often see that these managers will surround themselves with people who spoke really good English, and these were usually, in our experience, not the most capable people necessarily in the company. Some of the most capable people didn't speak English that well, and or they were shy or whatever, but they did not rise to the level where they would be advising the CEO. And so this gap was created, and the CEO didn't understand what was going on in the company. The bulk of the company was not comfortable with decision being made by by management. and there would, in many cases, be some kind of problem that emerge. We saw a number of really big cases where the employees basically rebelled and threatened to expose company secret.
Wow, and behind this all was some cultural and linguistic, say,
Mhm.
artificial gaps imposed by not recognizing what was lacking.
Mhm.
Well, Auli, the aspect of language and culture and using language then to accomplish our personal goals and so forth. You are engaged specifically in working with language proficiency, improving language learning, taking a look at standards and so forth. This is an in-depth plum that you've gotten into when you started out by not really knowing what language was. How have you turned the why are you turning attention to this external, for example, standards and demonstration?
Well, through my experience in Italy and Australia, I became very focused on the importance of language in terms of identity. And so the importance of effective language learning became apparent. And when I moved to Australia, after being in Italy on that 3 year stint I mentioned, I decided I want to do something to improve my language learning because I saw the impact, as I had described, of not being proficient in a language. So if you look at any endeavor, people are tested all the time, and if they know what the goals are that they're going to be tested on, and then they're more effective at reaching those goals. Language testing is a what word to use here, but it is an artifice, right? It's you sample what people can do. You can never have a perfect test, because the perfect test is going out in the street and living every day.
Yeah,
Are you effective at doing that or not? So the perfect test will be to capture 24 hours in somebody's life and see how they engage with people in different situations that were important to them. But the best thing next to that, in terms of helping people understand goals, helping educators be more effective at getting learners to reach those goals, is to build and deliver an assessment that measures those goals effectively and is scalable and allows assessment to be done in effective way.
only making sure that people can speak language well. We have sort of traditional ways. We've talked about it already a little bit here of the purpose of language to be able to go and to open new doors and have new experiences and so forth and so on. But take a look more deeply in the experience that you have in reflecting on language and language use in your life. I'm going to ask that question again that you asked in high school. What's language for?
Yeah, so language is just endlessly fascinating. The more engaged I've been with it, the more I've realized that the importance of it, and the definition of language is really squishy, and I'm not even going to attempt to address that point. But language is who we are. It's how we express ourselves. It's how we mm, it reflects the image that we have of ourselves. So when I was growing up, I worked very hard at developing a real intense Indonesian accent because I really want to identify as a kid from Indonesia. Um, and so
So
that
that's an sorry.
so and so that's an accent, but it's also language. And It is who I want to be and who I was. They say what's difference between a dialect and language. Well, a language is a dialect with an army, and that's the word as a it is probably always exist. Then the more powerful element in the world, their way of expressing themselves, their image of themselves become the dominant elements. We in Indonesia have rather unusual situation in that the language that people bring to Indonesia disappears, and we're still sadly largely monolingual population. Greg Robert has said that monolingualism is illiteracy illiteracy of the 21st century, and I agree strongly with him, but it is different from the rest of the world where people grow up speaking one language and they have to speak another language just to get around. So language in Indonesia is sometimes used as a way to dividing us. There's a pushback. People like Sultan Takdir Alis Bana, who's been very instrumental in creating the Indonesian language movement, where all the languages spoken in our country are valuable. So language is your identity. It is a lot of who you are.
Yeah, okay.
And that can be a point of pride, identity, or it can be something that creates division. And people who don't speak your language are other and give rise to an unhealthy attitude, I will say.
And how then, as a person who values language and has worked with language, how do you discuss language? What do you show about language to those who might consider the language other to be divisive?
Well, that's really good question, and I don't know if I have an answer for that. Other than doing what we can explain or describe the journeys that people have had who have learned a second language, and it is opened their heart and minds and made them more creative, more effective as a human being. I think certainly straightening program in school is something that can really help. The global seal and the state seal movement are really important because they celebrate language skills instead of taking the traditional, I would say, somewhat traditional stance of many places in Indonesia where heritage languages, people who bring languages to school are looked down upon because their Indonesian may be accent or not perfect. Instead, we celebrate those. And so I'm not sure there's much we can do in in the short run to change people's minds who are dead set against anything having to do with the promoting second language learning or to celebrating people who bring a second language to society that we live in. But we can celebrate those skills ourselves and make the people who have those skills feel proud of them and not have to hide them. As a society, I think we are foolish to not celebrate those skills because they benefit us psychologically, economically. There's no question that as a society, language help us in terms of building a more powerful country economically and socially. So yeah.
Talk about some of those. What are some of the ways? Because not everybody does understand the economic impact of monolingualism. or of the putting aside language, heritage language that had not been learned in school, which is a traditional way that Indonesia tends to think about how languages are learned in school, not brought from somewhere else, whereas some of the economic and social.
Well, certainly economically, if a company is eager to do business international, if a company eager to do business internationally, having employees who speak another language tremendously support those goals. Willy Brandt, the mayor of Berlin, once said, "Well, if I want to do something to you, I'm going to speak in English. Mm, but you want to sell me something, then you better speak German." And I think that's true. So if we really want to grow, and we need to speak the languages of the world, and Indonesian is just not enough. There's also the importance of understanding the culture of another company or country rather than language group. So this is one of the insights that my friend had when she worked for a large trading company in Italy. So she will be sitting on the Italian set negotiating with Indonesian over some deal.
And at heritage speakers can contribute so that their roles are more clearly understood and supported.
The important skills that the heritage language speaker bring to our society. There are countless job opportunities out there for people who speak another language. English is clearly the language that the most in demand, but there are also other languages as well. Bank need tellers who speak English. Stores need clerks. There's just a huge demand for people who have a second language. Now, many heritage speakers have there's all kinds of terminology for it, but let's say less formal language. So it is the language of the home, the kitchen, whatever, but it's not literacy. And that's why are so important, because to become literate is important if you're going to get a job in that language. And so expanding program that teach literacy, having a rewards, again, it is that goal. The goal of literacy becomes more important when you have something that celebrated, and then it becomes more economically viable, which isn't to say that those home variation or varieties of language, kitchen, whatever you want to call it, are valuable or important. Those are languages that are spoken at home. Those are real language. They're valuable. They allow communication, but they're not necessarily what you need in order to get job or become a part of the economy using the language. So I think there's just a whole set of elements that make those skills, those language skills more economically important, more socially recognized, and more psychologically beneficial to the people who bring those languages. The seal, the incentive, the measurement, the recognition of those skills in schools, the teaching of those skills, both by schools. There's a huge movement in the heritage language community or community supported heritage language schools. There are many languages that are taught on Saturday, typically Saturday school. Those are really important for the infrastructure in our country.
That's fascinating. And one of the things that keeps bubbling up here is the pride of the individual and so forth. The nature of language as
And we see this across the country, that just recognizing skills that students bring to the classroom enables them to graduate from high school. Another, I think it was 13% of those students need those credits in order to qualify for higher education, because most certainly 4 years in institution require at least 2 years of language study. That was huge.
no question. Wow. Okay. So Ali, we've been talking about basically solving problems, moving in positive directions, making a difference, and slow going. But on the way, but you've said to me at one point that some things will just stay confused. That's language. So what do you think will just plain old stay confused?
My goodness. Well, what is a language, right? Is it a dialect? Is it a Creole, or is it an accent? What's the definition? That's always going to stay confused. Are we moving towards a single language? Well, probably not. And actually, I hope not. But there's English, which has become the lingua franca of the world, if you will, using mixed linguistic. If you will, using mixed linguistic, I mean.
That
I'll understand, and I don't know what's going to happen. I think the world is evolving just very, very quickly. Languages are changing very quickly. I looked up some numbers before this. Now, 50% of the world speaks 20 languages. Oh,
50% of the world speaks 20 languages.
right.
Wow.
4% of the world speaks 96% of the total languages out there. The 7,000 or so that exist, we have a language dying every 14 days.
Oh,
So, is it important to maintain those languages? So, is it important to maintain those languages? We believe so, but we think it is critically. I mean, it is critical. Why? Because, as I said in a couple different ways through this conversation, that language is identity, but language can also be tremendous barrier to peace and harmony in our world. How do we get to the point where people can have their identity and their pride that comes from their language, and yet be able to communicate and integrate with the rest of the world? You've got Buginese in South Celebes as the language of commerce. You've got Javanese out there in Java. That was the native Indonesian trading language, where people needed something to trans their own language that had boundaries and limitation, but they want to maintain that the identity that came with the language they held in their own culture. So in Italy, I saw very sad case of a student who his parents had meant well for this this young Italian boy, but they kind of shuttle him back and forth between Italy and the United States, going to private school in the state, then back to Italy to school, and he basically non-lingual in the sense that he didn't have dominant language, and so he was kind of lost. He wasn't fluent in either language, and he was just kind of brave. Internet.
Wow.
And this is rare, but you do see it. It is also very rare to see truly bilingual people. We have a couple of friends in Italy who speak perfect accentless English with having received master degrees in Ivy League schools and also speak perfect Italian. They operate in Italy as high level professionals, but those people are pretty rare. But in any event, language will continue to be, I think, the dominant force in our world that unifies or divides us, and we have to, my belief is we have an obligation to strive towards efforts that will use language to bring us together, not to crush individuals' languages and force them to speak the dominant language, to help them, help all of us to be proficient in more than one language.
Beautifully said, Auli. I would like you now to turn, if you will, your attention to the folks that are listening to this podcast and give them one last invitation, exhortation, warning, whatever you'd like to interpret. What would you say to our listeners specifically now?
Recognize the value of language, the beauty that it brings to our lives, and and see it as unifying, not as a dividing element.
That's phenomenal, and I'm sure as powerful as it's likely to be, Auli.
As do we.
That's fantastic, Auli. Thank you so much for sharing your insight today. Always very thoughtful, very touching, and very much oriented at transforming the world as always. Thank you, Auli.
Thank you, Chris, for all you do.
So thank you so much for listening to this again. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, see you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Give me 1 second.